Good morning. This is Ron. It is Friday, the 20th of April. Welcome to Story Time. Okay, so it's going to be a four-segment show this morning. First, I'm going to have a small little editorial. Then we're going to go on to reading part two of Ayn Rand's Philosophy Who Needs It, the chapter 15, excuse me, of Philosophy Who Needs It, and then Rush Limbaugh, and after that, the cab driver's joke book. So, as far as the editorial is concerned, I saw in the news this morning that that there's a bunch of high school students here in the Los Angeles area that are going to be leaving class and they're going to go out and protest to advocate, I guess, gun control. This has to do with I think the anniversary of Columbine, and they're going to go out and leave class and make some sort of a protest. And first of all, when I was growing up and I was a kid, you're going to school, there's no such thing as the students getting together and deciding, well, we're going to leave class at a particular time and go, running around the neighborhood for 15, 20 minutes or an hour or so. It just wasn't done. If you tried to do that, then you're going to be suspended. At a minimum, you're going to end up being suspended and very possibly expelled from school. So that goes first. The other part of this, though, is what's really ridiculous is that the last high school shooting, that's what started and prompted a lot of high schoolers to go, or helped to prompt a lot of high schoolers to go ahead and start protests and advocate gun control. The other part of this, of course, is that there are various organizations that are professional organizations that actually went ahead and organized these students and paid for these protests because they cost money. You got to have buses and whatnot in order to be able to go ahead and make the protest effective. So, and it came right after the shooting in Florida, in which I think it was 17 children were killed. I think one adult and 17 children were killed. And again, what people are not realizing in this, as they are debating the gun control, is that the problem with that particular shooting was law enforcement. I mean, it was completely law enforcement. The FBI knew that the situation was either going to occur or likely to occur and did nothing. And the sheriff's department in the area was on scene before it happened, while it happened, after it happened, and did nothing. 17 people died needlessly because law enforcement failed to do its job. That seems to me that's the first order of business in terms of ending gun violence, is law enforcement has to do its job. If they're on scene, then they have to intervene and do what they can to stop the shooter, killing them if necessary. The FBI has to do its job. If it gets a tip that there is somebody that's likely to become a shooter or is threatened to become a shooter, the FBI must notify appropriate agencies and make an effort to nip this problem in the bud. Neither the FBI nor the Sheriff's Department bothered to do their job, and that's why 17 people lost their lives. And until you can get law enforcement to do its job, it doesn't matter how many laws you pass. You could go out tomorrow and pass a law that bans every single gun in the United States of America, and if law enforcement isn't willing to do its job, it doesn't matter. Okay, when I come back, it's going to be chapter 15 of Ayn Rand's Philosophy Who Needs It? Okay, I'm back, and Censorship, Local and Express is the name of the chapter, and Ayn Rand has been going talking about how the government is creating censorship, and in this particular case, via the Supreme Court. And she's going over reviewing some cases. There was 5 particular cases in the 1970s that came up. They were obscenity cases, and that came before the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court made some landmark rulings, and Ayn Rand is going ahead and commenting on those. I would argue that since a legal rule is a principle, the development of its logical consequences cannot be cut off, except by repealing the principle. But assuming that such a cutoff were possible, no line of any sort is drawn in the Miller decision. The community standards of average persons are explicitly declared to be a sovereign power over sexual matters and over the works that deal with sexual matters. In the same Miller decision, Chief Justice Burger admits that no such line can be drawn. Nothing in the First Amendment requires that a jury must consider hypothetical and unascertainable national standards when attempting to determine whether certain materials are obscene as a matter of fact. He quotes Chief Justice Warren saying in an earlier case, "I believe that there is no provable national standard. At all events, this court has not been able to enunciate one, and it would be unreasonable to expect local courts to divine one." By what means are local courts to divine a local one? Actually, the only provable standard of what constitutes obscenity would be an objective standard, philosophically proved and valid for all men. Such a standard cannot be defined or enforced in terms of law. It would require the formulation of an entire philosophic system, but even this would not grant anyone the right to enforce that standard on others. When the court, however, speaks of a provable national standard, it does not mean an objective standard. It substitutes the collective for the objective and seeks to enunciate a standard held by all average persons in the nation. Since even a guess at such a concept is patently impossible, the court concludes that what is impossible and improper nationally is permissible locally and, in effect, passes the buck to state legislatures, granting them the power to enforce arbitrary, unprovable, local standards. Chief Justice Burger's arguments in the Miller decision are not very persuasive. Quote, "It is neither realistic nor constitutionally sound to read the First Amendment as requiring that the people of Maine or Mississippi accept public depiction of conduct found tolerable in Las Vegas or New York City," unquote. I read the First Amendment as not requiring any person anywhere to accept any depiction he does not wish to read or see, but forbidding him to abridge the rights and freedom of those who do wish to read or see it. In another argument against a national standard of what constitutes obscenity, the decision declares, quote, "People in different states vary in their tastes and attitudes, and this diversity is not to be strangled by the absolutism of imposed uniformity," unquote. What about the absolutism of imposed uniformity within a state? What about the nonconformists in that state? What about communication between citizens of different states? What about the freedom of a national marketplace of ideas? No answers are given. The following argument, offered in a footnote, is unworthy of a serious tribunal. Quote, "The mere fact juries may reach different conclusions as to the same material does not mean that constitutional rights are abridged. As this court observed in Roth v. United States, it is common experience that different juries may reach different results under any criminal statute. That is one of the consequences we accept under our jury system," unquote. In a criminal case, the jury's duty is only to determine whether a particular defendant committed the crime which is clearly and specifically defined by the statute. Under the new obscenity ruling, a jury is expected to determine whether the defendant committed an undefined crime and simultaneously to determine what the crime is. Thus, the Nixon court's notion of censorship sharing by diffusing it at random over the entire country is as illusory as Nixon's notion of returning power to the states by means of revenue sharing. While the public rides on the creaking train of local censorship, with delays, derailments, and chaos at every whistle stop, the express of statism is flying full speed on an unobstructed track. 4 of the justices who handed down the Miller decision are regarded as conservatives. The 5th, Justice White, is regarded as middle of the road. On the other hand, Justice Douglas is the most liberal or the most leftward-leaning member of the court, yet his dissent in the Miller case is an impassioned cry of protest and indignation. He rejects the notion that the First Amendment allows an implied exception in the case of obscenity. Quote, I do not think it does, and my views on the issue have been stated over and over again, unquote. He declares, quote, obscenity, which even we cannot define with precision, is a hodgepodge. To send men to jail for violating standards they cannot understand, construe, and apply is a monstrous thing to do in a nation dedicated to fair trials and due process. Unquote. What about the antitrust laws, which are responsible for precisely this kind of monstrous thing? Justice Douglas does not mention them, but antitrust, as we shall see later, is a chicken that comes home to roost on both sides of this issue. On the subject of censorship, however, Justice Douglas is eloquently consistent. Quote, the idea that the First Amendment permits punishment for ideas that are offensive to the particular judge or jury sitting in judgment is astounding. No greater level of speech or literature has ever been designed. To give the power to the censor, as we do today, is to make a sharp and radical break with the tradition of a free society. The First Amendment was not fashioned as a vehicle for dispensing tranquilizers to the people. Its prime function was to keep debate open to offensive as well as to staid people. The tendency throughout history has been to subdue the individual and to exalt the power of government. The use of the standard offensive gives authority to government that cuts the very vitals out of the First Amendment. As it is intimated by the court's opinion, the materials before us may be garbage, but so is much of what is said in political campaigns, in the daily press, on TV, or over the radio. By reason of the First Amendment, and solely because of it, speakers and publishers have not been threatened or subdued because their thoughts and ideas may be offensive to some. I can only say amen, or to some in that's unquote. I can only say amen to this statement. Observe that such issues as the individual against the state were never mentioned in the Supreme Court's majority decision. It is Justice Douglas, the arch-liberal, who defends individual rights. It is the conservatives who speak as if the individual did not exist, as if the unit of social concern were the collective, the community. A profound commitment to moral collectivism does not occur in a vacuum. As a causeless primary, it requires an epistemological foundation. The Supreme Court's majority decision in the case of Paris Adult Theater 1 v. Slayton reveals that foundation. This case involves two movie theaters in Atlanta, Georgia, which exhibited allegedly obscene films, admitting only adults. The local trial court ruled that this was constitutionally permissible, but the Georgia Supreme Court reversed the decision on the grounds that hardcore pornography is not protected by the First Amendment. Thus, the issue before the U.S. Supreme Court was whether it is constitutional to abridge the freedom of consenting adults. The court's majority decision said yes. Epistemologically, this decision is a proclamation of non-objectivity. It supports and defends explicitly the most evil of social phenomena, non-objective law. The decision, written by Chief Justice Burger, declares, quote, we hold that there are legitimate state interests at stake in stemming the tide of commercialized obscenity. These include the interest of the public in the quality of life and the total community environment, the tone of commerce in the great city centers, and possibly the public safety itself, unquote. Try to find a single issue or action that would be exempt from this kind of legitimate state interest. Quoting a book by Professor Bickel, the decision declares, quote, a man may be entitled to read an obscene book in his room, but if he demands a right to obtain the books and pictures he wants in the market, then to grant him his right is to affect the world about the rest of us and to impinge on the other privacies. What is commonly read and seen and heard and done intrudes upon us all, want it or not, unquote. What human activity would be exempt from a declaration of this kind? And what advocate of a totalitarian dictatorship would not endorse that declaration? Mr. Berger concludes that, quote, there is no scientific data which conclusively demonstrates that exposure to obscene materials adversely affects men and women or their society, unquote. But he rejects this as an argument against the suppression of such materials, and there follows an avalanche of statements and of quotations from earlier court decisions, all claiming, in terms broader than the issue of pornography, that scientific knowledge and conclusive proof are not required as a basis for legislation, that the state has the right to enact laws on the grounds of what does or might exist. Scientific data, in the proper literal sense of these words, means knowledge of reality, reached by a process of reason, and conclusive demonstration means that the content of a given proposition is proved to be a fact of reality. It is reason and reality that are here being removed as a limitation on the power of the state. It is the right to legislate on the basis of any assumption, any hypothesis, any guess, any feeling, any whim, on any grounds or none that is here being conferred on the government. And that's going to be the end of this part of Censorship, Local, and Express. And it's an excellent example, again, of the idea that philosophy is behind everything that we do and say, that she's doing an excellent job in showing how epistemology is the study of knowledge, and learning is behind a lot of the Supreme Court's decision, and that the fact that the Supreme Court is looking at this particular issue more as a political issue rather than addressing it initially, first and foremost, as a philosophical issue. Solve the philosophical problem, and the legal and political problem solves itself. So, when I come back, it's going to be time for Rush Limbaugh. Okay, I'm back, and this is from April 18th, and his show on April 18th, and this segment is called Demented Professor Celebrates the Death of Barbara Bush. Rush, we're in the midst here of a period of time when the drive-by media thinks there's going to be this gigantic blue wave election in November where the Democrats are just going to win everything, just like Hillary was going to win everything in 2016. Quick comment on this is that no, he's wrong about that. They don't think that they're going to win. They didn't think that Hillary was going to win. It goes beyond that. The Democrats, and particularly the left wing of the party, are people that want to use psychology as power. And I think power and psychology pretty much go hand in hand and are probably indistinguishable from one another. Exercising power in a lot of ways is psychological in nature. But what they want to do is they see themselves as being leaders, change agents, and reality shapers. And there's a certain thought that by creating an affirmation, that you can create change, that you can do so almost automatically and effortlessly. And I've been through some courses that describe exactly how this is done, where you get into a meditative state and then you picture certain things occurring in your life, and you picture a goal, you set a goal and picture that goal occurring at some future date, and that you will end up moving towards that goal again almost automatically. And that's what the Democrats are doing here. They did it in 2016 with Hillary. They didn't predict her victory. They affirmed it. And they kept affirming it. And they thought the more people that are affirming this victory, then the victory is going to become unstoppable, inevitable. The left loves inevitability, this weird concept of inevitability. And certain things perhaps in metaphysical reality are inevitable, but in man-made realities, very little is actually inevitable. And so, again, making the affirmations for Hillary in 2016, and they're doing the same thing right now. They really haven't changed fundamentally. They haven't learned their lesson. Affirmations aren't going to work. If you want to affirm for yourself that you're a non-smoker so that you can stop smoking, that's possible. That's doable. But to go ahead and make affirmations regarding the entire country is not. You can't do it. So, uh, back with Rush. You look at what they're campaigning on, and you have to ask, how in the world do they really think this is going to lead to massive blue wave, quote unquote, landslide victories? Because it's nothing but rage and hatred. It's irrational. I'll go through some of these things in a moment, but time is dwindling, and I need to. In fact, I may have to take a break here. As a professor at Fresno State who is gloating over the death of Barbara Bush. For those of you watching on DittoCam, I want to show you a picture of this babe. Ahem. Her name is Rhonda Gerard. Throw it up there. There it is. Throw it up. That's the professor flipping off the photographer with her middle finger. She's not pregnant, by the way. That is a normal, everyday photo. This woman is a professor. This woman is teaching young skulls full of mush, the drivel, and the poison, the hatred that she harbors, and she went out and said she is so happy. She is so happy, she says, either you, quote, either you are against these pieces of blank and their genocidal ways, or you're part of the problem. That's actually how simple this is. I'm happy the witch is dead. Can't wait for the rest of her family to fall to their demise the way 1.5 million Iraqis have. Bye, unquote. And then she starts gloating about how she has tenure and nobody could do anything to her. And the comment I got to make about this is that, again, one of the habits that Republicans and conservatives get into is whining and complaining about how the left seems to get away with so much. And it almost seems as though sometimes that the conservatives are saying, gee, I wish we could get away with crap like this. This would be a perfect opportunity for Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, whoever, but in this particular case, it'll be Rush Limbaugh, to step in and say, no Republican would ever dare say such a thing about a Democrat. No conservative would ever stoop so low, would ever be so ugly as to go ahead and say something this bad about so let's say the former first, like Rosalind Carter. If Rosalind Carter passed away, no Republican or conservative would ever even think about uttering such a statement. We're glad she's dead and all that kind of thing. So let's see. Being a very angry, unhappy woman, I'm looking for. I wish somebody did. You could get fired. Well, okay, here it is. 25, 30 years ago when this program started, if anybody in public had wished somebody dead, it could get you fired. It could ruin your reputation. You would be shunned. You would become so stigmatized today. Today, people on the left are applauded. They're supported. In fact, they give medals for this kind of stuff. So, but again, first thing that he can do is to draw the distinction between left and right. The left has no standards. Left has no standards. They believe the ends justify the means, might makes right. And what is the end they're looking for? Socialist paradise. So they will agitate, try to make people mad at one another, gloat, do whatever they have to in order to try to bring about their little socialist revolution, et cetera, et cetera. The Republicans don't have to stand for it. One of the things that the Republicans can do, even though this professor is tenured and cannot be fired, apparently, is that the Republican Congress can review all of the federal aid that is going to Fresno State. They can then come up with some kind of a bill or a law that says Fresno State is going to either get a cutback or perhaps receive no federal funding. Because that's one of the things is that if you have the taxpayers providing you with money, the taxpayers have the right to set conditions on the receipt of that money. So Republicans can do things about this and stop it. You don't have to sit here and say, woe is me, gee, I wish for the good old days. No, you don't have to do that. And you don't also have to act like, gee, I wish I could get away with this. Look at what the Democrats are getting away with. Stand up. Draw the distinction between right and left, then go out and demand that, as a taxpayer, that Congress do something to curtail the taxpayer funding of this particular institution. So when I come back, it is going to be time for the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book. Okay, so I'm back, and reading from the New York City Cab Driver's joke book by Jim Peach. Let's see, there it is. The Pope and a lawyer happen to die at the same time and are standing together at the gates of heaven. St. Peter says to them, "Ah, gentlemen, we've been expecting you. Your rooms are ready." He turns to the lawyer and says, "Excuse me for a moment while I take the Pope to his room. I will return presently and will then show you to your quarters." "Gee," says the lawyer, "I wouldn't mind tagging along with you while you take the Pope to his room. That is, of course, if you don't mind." "We would be delighted," says St. Peter, looking at the Pope. The Pope smiles, and they all proceed through the pearly gates. They arrive at the Pope's room, and St. Peter opens the door. The room has a twin bed, a couple of chairs, a little table, a 13-inch color TV, and looks pretty much like a room in a Holiday Inn. Taking his leave of the thankful Pope, St. Peter then escorts the lawyer to his room. He opens the door, and the lawyer is shocked to see a palatial suite, complete with balcony, king-size bed, spiral staircase, color TV console with remote control, stereo, VCR, plush carpeting, jacuzzi, and a sauna. He's totally flabbergasted and says to St. Peter, "This room is terrific. But tell me, why is it that the Pope, the leader of the entire Roman Catholic Church, got only a standard room, and I got this wonderful penthouse?" "To tell you the truth," says St. Peter, "we had many popes check in up here, but you're the first lawyer to make it." How can you tell when a lawyer is lying? His lips are moving. A man goes into the hospital for a routine circumcision. However, after he wakes up from the anesthesia, he sees a large group of doctors gathered around him. "What happened?" he asks worriedly. "Well," says one of the doctors, "we made a small mistake. There's a slight mix-up, and we performed the wrong operation on you. Instead of a circumcision, we gave you a sex change operation. We cut off your penis and gave you a vagina." "What?" says the man. "That's terrible. You mean I'll never again experience an erection?" "Well, you will," says the doctor, "but it'll be somebody else's." A man down on his luck goes home to his wife and tells her, "Look, dear, we're low on money now, and we're going to have to cut down on some luxuries." He then adds scornfully, "If you would learn to cook, we could fire the chef." "In that case," replies the woman, "if you would learn to make love, we could fire the chauffeur." A drunk walks into a bar and sits down. In front of each stool, he sees 3 darts. He calls the bartender over and says, "Hey, what are these here for?" The bartender says, "Well, you take the darts, throw them at the dartboard behind the bar here, and anyone that gets 3 bullseyes in a row wins a prize." "Oh," says the drunk, stifling a burp. "All right." Picks up a dart, weaving from side to side, hurls it, clutching the bar at the last moment, just in time to prevent himself from falling off the stool. Amazingly, the dart lands firmly in the center of the bullseye. Picks up the second dart, one hand on the bar, steadying himself as best he can. He throws it, and with a follow-through, collapses onto the bar, his head hitting the wood with a resounding thump. Incredibly, though, the dodge lodges itself right next to the other one. Another perfect bullseye. The drunk then pushes himself off the bar, picks up the third dart, and takes careful aim with 2 eyes that are looking in different directions. As he throws the last dart, he falls backward off the stool and lands in a heap on the floor. But miraculously, the dart lands once more again in the bullseye. As he stands up and wobbles over to the bar, the drunk says loudly, "I want a prize, I want a prize." The bartender, astounded, says to him, "Okay, buddy, okay, you'll get your prize. Just hang on a minute." And as he turns around, the bartender thinks to himself, "What am I going to do? Nobody has ever won before. What am I going to give this guy?" Looking around the bar, he sees an old aquarium in the corner. He goes over, rolls up his sleeve, reaches into the water, pulls out a nice medium-sized turtle. He goes back to the bar and walks up to the drunk. "Okay, pal," he says, "here's your prize." The drunk's bloodshot eyes light up for an instant, and he says, "Thanks a lot." He then takes the turtle and staggers out of the bar. A couple of weeks pass, and then one day the same drunk stumbles back into the bar. He sits down at the same stool and calls out to the bartender, "I want to try for a prize. I want to try for a prize." The bartender walks over and says, "All right, buddy, go ahead." The drunk then manages to repeat his previous performance, with the one difference being that this time he manages to fall off the bar stool after every shot. However, he does make the 3 bullseyes. "I want a prize," he shouts. "I want a prize." The bartender's totally flabbergasted. Says to the drunk, "I can't believe it. Nobody's ever done this before, and you've done it twice in a row." The drunk says, "Well, give me my prize." Bartender says, "To tell you the truth, buddy, I just don't know what to give you. What did I give you last time?" The drunk belches, smiles dreamily, and says, "Roast beef on hard roll." Well, that's the end of today's episode of Story Time, and thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you again tomorrow.